Okay, let's go. Let's get back in the ring. Charlie Huertas from the Philippines, 1580. Let's play the Sicilian Defense. And he plays the Alapin Sicilian, named after Simon Alapin. I'll talk about him later. What is the purpose of the Alapin Sicilian? The purpose is to control the center with d4. We need to preempt white from going d4. We don't want to let him control the entire center. How can we do that? How can we preempt white from controlling the center? How can we do it first? What can we do? Yeah, we can go e5. That's fine. But e5, if you guys may notice, weakens the d5 square. And that kind of, I don't want to create a big weakness on a central square like that. Let's go d5. And it is true. Okay, he goes e5. Again, he wants to play d4. So we're going to play d4 ourselves to stop him from doing that. Our pawn is sort of wedged here. It's stopping him from naturally controlling the center. We've got a nice position. I'll talk about this opening a little bit later. Bishop b5. We already kind of know how to respond to this type of move. What should we do? How should we deal with the fact of this pin being kind of annoying? Again, not all of our pieces always need to be conquering, you know, the Greek or the... Okay, d3 is a very typical mistake. I need somebody... I'm not going to give you any hints. Black to play and win. How do I see this? Two things. Number one, undefended pieces. Loose pieces drop off. Number two, as soon as a move is made in front of the king, even tangentially, you must look at the diagonals that have been opened and consider whether you cannot put a piece on those diagonals. Queen a5 wins a piece, and this basically wins the game because knight c3, we take it. Remember, we have a pawn on d4. That's why we put it there. Right. It's all good. No, but normally you'd be right, Zazy. And he's fuming right now, I'm telling you. Boom. We're also attacking three different pawns. Well, let's take one of them. Let's take... we should have taken b2 because we would have probably also won the rook. But I was just too attracted by the juicy central pawn on d3. Okay. Now, what do I always tell you guys when we win a lot of material? When we win a lot of material, what do you not want to forget to do? What do you not want to forget to do? Nope, not trade. Develop. Develop your pieces when you've won material. Do not forget about that. Trading, and I talked about this at the very beginning of the speedrun, it's good. In general, trading is good when you're up material, but two things to point out. It's not the only way to convert a material advantage. You can also use your material to attack. I call this sort of method one. And the other thing is that people get in a lot of trouble, by the way, just defending the pawn. People get in a lot of trouble when you go out of your way to trade pieces. You don't want to cripple your entire position solely for the purpose of trading one pair of pieces. If a trade falls in your lap, as these trades are here, sure, go ahead and trade a bunch of pieces, fine. But not if you have to cripple your position somehow just for the sake of one trade. So here, for example, the trades are literally falling in our lap. He's offering us to take the bishop. Queen to c3 basically forces the queen trade. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, we have kind of a nice move here. How do we get this queen out of d6? We can basically trap it. We can go queen c5, but let's look for something even better. Boom, knight f5, get back to b4, forcing the trade, we win the game. Okay. All right. Queen b4, we take it. And now the same rules remain in the endgame. We don't want to forget to consolidate. Do we need this pawn? We don't need this pawn. We don't need this pawn. Let's deploy our bishop to the most active square. And what should we do now? In the interest of things that I explained, can somebody tell me a good move in this position? We can, again, if a trade falls in your lap, yeah, and everybody's suggesting good moves. King e7 is great, increasing the coordination between the pieces. Castling is not as good in the endgame because there's no need to castle. We can do the same thing as we would when we castle. by putting our king on e7, which is closer to the center. Now, we got to be very careful. Bishop b7 would run into a nasty little check on c7. How do we circumvent that? We can just drop it to d7, right? We force the rook trade. The game is over. Okay. Infiltrating. Infiltrating. We're going to just start picking off his pawns. How do we convert this position? We identify the area where we can create a passed pawn. And then we create one, either by taking a bunch of our opponent's pawns or by pushing our pawns and just creating a passer. There's no rocket science here, right? I'm literally doing as I say. I'm going to create a passed pawn, and I'm going to use my extra material, the extra bishop, to force white's rook away. He's probably going to go rook b3. Yep. So, no problem. Let's defend the pawn of the rook. Now, where should we put our bishop to dislodge the rook from b3? Yeah, just let's go here. Bishop c6, bishop d5, b3. The fact of the matter is we have so much extra material that we can use it to continually get this rook out of its blockading post. That's just how you usually win these types of positions. Not the only way. Boom, b2, very formulaic. Then bishop e4. It's the same thing repeated again and again until his rook has to permanently move away or give itself up for the pawn. And then we're going to have a rook extra. Okay. Identify a pass pawn. Yeah, well, sometimes you see a specific pass pawn that you can create. Sometimes you see the general area of the board where a pass pawn can be created, but you don't know exactly which pass pawn it's going to be. Okay. Goodbye. That's over. Yeah, this is not the only way to convert this. Again, I want to make it very clear that when I'm winning like this, there's a million possible moves on every move. There isn't just one way of doing this. I'm just trying to show the most sort of play it by the rules, by the book way of converting. Same thing, by the way. We're just going to create a pass pawn. We're going to push it. Even though I'm up a million pieces, we don't have to push any of our pawns. I could move my king up and checkmate him. But the easiest is just going to be to push the pawn. Don't forget about not stalemating. That's why, and there we go, 1600, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a great place to stop, but let's take a quick look at the game first. Okay, so the Alpin Sicilian is named after Szymon Alpin, who was a Lithuanian chess master from, I believe, the early 20th century. And who was the first to play the Alpin? Thank you, Trash Panda Mun, for the sub. Let's take some bets. Who thinks that Alpin, Szymon Alpin, was the first person to play the Alpin? Let's get a yay. Who thinks that Alpin was the first person to play an Alpin? No, he was not the first person to play an Alpin. He was the fifth person to play the Alpin, but he was one of the earliest proponents of it. The first person to play the Alpin was in modern recorded history, was a guy named William Popert in London in 1841. He played it against Howard Staunton, one of the strongest players of the 19th century, and beat him with the Alpin. Then it was played in 1842 by John William Schulten, another very strong English player, but got crushed. And only in 1898 was it played by Alpin himself. So, as I've made clear before, some of these openings are named after people, but that doesn't mean those people were the first people to play them. Sometimes they never even played the opening named after them, as in the case of the Philidor. The Philidor is named after Philidor, but he never actually played it. I think he just talked about it in his book. But it's kind of interesting how this kind of chess naming stuff works. The Damiano is often named after Damiano. This is a horrible move. And I've shared this story many times. Damiano, a 17th century chess master, wrote one of the first books ever on chess. And he refuted the Damiano, but we don't call it Damiano's refutation. Like, who is this Damiano? He was the one who actually said it was bad. And yet we think it was this idiot Damiano who wanted to play f6. So it's just interesting how this kind of stuff works. But we played d5, and he played a weird move, e5. E takes d5 is the main move. Now, what is the reason why this is better than a Scandi? Well, if you look very carefully at this position, you compare it to a Scandi. Who can tell me what the main difference is with the insertion of these moves? Like, what move does... Yeah, knight c3 is not possible, and as you guys know, that's often one of the key indicators for whether a queen is safe in the center. Can he develop the knight and attack the queen simultaneously? And here the answer is no. I played the Alpen myself as my main opening for many years. There's a theoretical line that goes like this. And this is a very interesting opening. I mean, it's not clear who's better. It's a very rich position, which I will not go into right now. But this is, you know, the move e5, he wants to transpose into some sort of a French, but we stopped him from doing that, right? We wedged the pawn through to d4, and then his key mistake was d3, which allows, of course, this fork against his bishop. What should he have done? If he castled, we actually have another nice tactic in this position. Ooh, but there's some beautiful counter tactics. The bishop on b5, what can you tell me about it? Undefended, remember what I said about pins. They go both ways. Either side can exploit a pin. It's like a two-sided coin. How can we exploit the bishop on b5? We can do knight takes e5. This is a very typical idea. It's a bit, you're like, did you just say it's a very typical idea? Have you personally, Daniel, have you personally applied this idea in one of your games? Have you personally applied, what do you guys think? Yes, I have. In fact, I can show you the very game in which this position, this type of tactic was. This is a very, very typical tactic. It truly is. And I'm stalling because I'm loading up the game. I'm trying to do it as fast as possible. I just managed to do it. And there we go. Okay, so I had a game in 2010 where something very similar happened. I was playing an IM, and my opponent played bishop g5 in this position. The bishop here isn't strictly speaking undefended. It is protected by the queen. But if you look at this very carefully, I've got two pieces that are sort of x-raying that bishop. And so knight takes d5 happens. The same knight that captures the pawn is guarding the bishop, which is very important because if I could not take back with the knight here, I would lose the knight. And here you could just take with the knight and I'm up a pawn. And if he takes on d5, then obviously I play bishop takes g5 and I'm up a pawn. So very similar tactical idea. So this is quite typical. But the problem here is if you calculate a little bit further, what you'll see is that after knight takes c5, bishop takes b5, black is very poorly developed. I mean, not developed. What move? And white is a very nasty move here, which wins the game for white. Again, the bishop is undefended. Square on f7. You have to pay attention to this. Boom. Fork. Attacking the bishop and attacking f7. This shows the importance of always having to calculate as far as possible. A lot of people are falling in love with knight f7. This would be worse. Remember the piece of advice I shared earlier. If you have a two-move sequence, one move, two moves, you want to consider both move orders because sometimes you only consider one move order. You forget that by making the second move first, you greatly increase the effectiveness of that operation. So queen b3 would actually win the game. It would win the bishop or it would deliver checkmate. And so if he had castled, we probably should have gone e6 and just continued our development. Okay. The idea behind knight f7 Yazazi could be either queen h5 or queen b3. I think both moves are quite equivalent. You could win the bishop this way, or you could win the bishop this way. But the net result of it is the same. The king is out in the open. Black is worse. But it's a question of how much worse. Here, black is completely lost. So this is crushing. And that's just part of why chess is a cruel game. You know, sometimes you can see a lot more than your opponent. Our opponent may have even missed the move knight takes e5. But this kind of tactic falls into his lap. That's one of the things that always concerns me when I'm playing quite, weaker players, is I might see a lot more than them, but I'm going to have to choose a path at some point, and a tactic like this could be low-hanging fruit. So, that's part of the equation. Okay, so that's basically how that happened, and after we won the piece, the rest was very simple. We should have taken b2, of course. I forgot that this pawn was on d4. Usually, Bishop c3 is possible, but here it's not. And his only way to save the rook is to give up the knight, and that gives up the second piece. And like that time I got my queen trapped, exactly. That's a great example of that. And so here we just traded all the pieces, defended what needed to be defended, forcing the queen trade, giving up the pawn to trade more pieces, bringing the bishop to d7, not b7, allowing this, and identifying the area of the board where we can create a pass pawn, creating the pass pawn, using our extra piece to dislodge the rook, cooperating rook and bishop, again, create a pass pawn, push it, and he resigns. Simple, textbook, play it by the rules. Can be very effective. Yeah, let's go. Okay. So let's go e4, as we have been customarily doing. Okay, knight c6. That's the Nimzovich defense. d4 is possible here. Another good move is knight f3. And yeah, so he goes d5. So this is like a souped-up version of the Scandi. Our response is no different than it would be in the Scandi. So what should white do here? How do we usually play in the Scandi? Like, what are the next two moves, actually? Just knight c3 is correct. And then d4. Okay, queen h5. Yeah, this is it's actually kind of a dangerous system. Okay, so d4. Yeah, this is what Aquila plays, by the way, one of my close friends and mods. And this actually is an opening that we have to respond very accurately to. Now, Black's idea is to very quickly pile up on the d4 pawn. Okay? And for that reason, he's putting all his eggs in one basket. He's going to castle, and he's going to basically have the equivalent of 4 pieces, either directly or indirectly attacking the d4 pawn. So the correct move in this position is to immediately go after the knight on c6. This is just theoretical knowledge, and I will explain this properly after the game. But it's not an intuitive move because it allows bishop takes f3, which kind of cripples the pawn structure. But that's okay, and I'll show you guys why. d5 is the tempting move here, but he castles, and the rook then pins the queen. I'll show this in detail after the game. And let me remember. Yeah, and now the move is queen to e2. And a bishop e2, yeah, again, this is a bit theoretical, so delving into the details would require me to move the pieces around. Okay, bishop e4. Now we can sort of play based on our understanding. He pins the other knight, and this guy really goes after me. And, you know, we need to defend first and foremost against this pin. And so we're going to do that by going bishop to d2, just taking the sting out of this pin, unpinning ourselves. And the correct move for black would be knight g2. Yeah, he's very good. This guy has played the opening extremely well. And I should know this a little bit better, this line. Let me think. Yeah, so let's chase the bishop away, first of all. Let's make this bishop decide what it wants to do. And it's good to ask your opponent questions in this regard. You know, like forcing your opponent to... Yeah, let's chase the bishop away entirely. And now this pawn is once again under some pressure, so we're going to get this bishop out to e3 to protect that pawn, to give it some support. And, yeah, no, I definitely... We didn't play this particularly well. Well, d4 is not hanging, because remember that we're pinning the knight. He should castle here. Yeah, and he's in very good shape in this position. We're going to go rook d1 to try to defend the pawn. He's going to go rook d8. No, knight f5 is probably... Okay, this is inaccurate. And the reason this is inaccurate is because he leaves a particular piece unattended. Which piece does he leave unattended? What can we take here to lessen the immediate pressure on the pawn? Yeah, we can take the knight. And we also kind of double his pawns, which I should have done much earlier. And now we need to discharge... Well, we need to solve the problem of this pawn. Okay, this pawn is bothering the hell out of me. And the way to solve the problem of a weak pawn, first and foremost, is to ask yourself, can I defend it with another pawn? And, well, the answer is yes. You can defend it with a c-pawn. To defend it with a c-pawn, you have to move this knight. Now, where should we move this knight? Well, we should move it to a civilized square, a square where it's also doing something. Let's move it toward the center with knight to e4. And, again, this is a complicated position. White is certainly not better here. But these are the kinds of positions where usually like 1600s really struggle. Yeah, and that's a big mistake. Knight takes e4 is a very big mistake, and that's a very typical mistake from someone of his rating range, which I'll explain afterward. Why is it a mistake? Because this knight on f5 that he had is actually a super strong piece. And what he allows us to do is solve the problem of the pawn, right? We take with the pawn, and now look at his bishop. It's biting at granite. We didn't even need to play c3. And he's left with bishops. He doesn't have a knight, and a knight would be a great kind of screwdriver type of piece here. And now he tries to attack us, but I've got enough beef here on the king side in the form of both knights. He's also weak in the e5 square, where later maybe I could stick a knight there, although most likely he's going to take this knight with his bishop. And, well, we can continue our development by castling. We can finally castle our king. f4 would be a good move here. This guy is vastly underrated. And now we still have to play c3 because he's eliminated the defender of the d4 pawn, so we have to reinforce it again. He's probably going to go here. Now, the reason that I still like white's position here is because this bishop on b6 is terrible, and it's buried. It's completely buried. It can't get out of the game. The only way that it can get out of the game is if black orchestrates some sort of dastardly scheme with e5. So why does e5 work? e5 may work because the bishop is exerting this pin over the king. So what can we do to kind of prevent e5, to take the sting out of it? What can we do? Well, we could go c4, but yeah, c4, but that would weaken the d4 square. Let's just stick a queen there. Now there's a beautiful variation I have to show you guys. Let me not forget. We could have moved our king to h1. And that's the sort of typical prophylactic move, but then there's a beautiful variation that I think would have actually landed that in quite a bit of trouble. Okay, so he trades on f3. There's a lot to unpack in this game. It's a very instructive game. And we have a lot of analyzing to do. So I'm sorry for not explaining some of the key things here, but trust me, I'll go over them after the game. And now he's worse. He's made another very instructive mistake. He's given up his strongest pair of pieces, which were exerting pressure on our position. And in his logic, he's weakened our kingside pawn structure. But this is nothing that we can't deal with. Maybe we can just bring our king up, and the king is nicely defending both weaknesses. And he's left with a terrible bishop that's never going to enter the game because he can't enter it backwards and he can't enter it forwards. The pawns are limiting it. So now what we have to do is make sure that black doesn't get anywhere. So let's go rook to d2 to stop the queen penetration to c2. And rook f5 is a nice move. We can't take the rook because of the pin, but we can just drop the queen back to e4. We're starting to attack his weaknesses, finally. He attacks our rook, but he blunders the pawn on e6. And his position has started to crumble. His position has started to crumble. He's got to go rook f7, otherwise we either take the rook, now we can move our rook out of the way. And yeah, this bishop is what's going to kill him. He's basically playing down a piece. And he's doing a great job of it. And you know what the most instructive thing to do here is? Well, actually, we can just take the pawn. We could have just traded all of the pieces because he would have been literally left with this bishop that is completely useless. But as it stands, we can win another pawn, and he's probably going to get his queen out and miss queen a8, which is checkmate. Nope. Yeah, this guy is just flat out good. Not an easy win at all. And but we're going to take another one. Now, he nobly tries to involve his bishop. The problem is by the time he activates his bishop, the Earth will have turned into a supernova and disappeared into the universe. I mean, he's losing all of his pawns. We're going to give him a nice little check to dislodge the king so that we can take g7 as well. And yeah, goodbye. And this is just checkmate. I mean, well, we're winning all of his pieces. And yeah, the bishop is now active. Congratulations. But I think he's... And watch him go bishop c7. That'll be hilarious. He finally activates his bishop, but he has no pieces left. I think he's going to resign. Oh, planets don't turn into a supernova. That's funny. Okay, well, it just takes an h4. Yeah, I don't know why he's not resigning. Oh, there we go. Here it comes. Here it comes. Here it comes. All right, and now it's going to give itself up for the... Yep. Okay, I have no idea why this man is playing. Just none. Zero. We just get our king up. Just don't stalemate the guy. Okay. He wants stalemate, but he's not going to get it. One order of stalemate coming up. Okay, that was a really rich game, actually. And I know that to some people it can be annoying that we spend a long time on the games and stuff, but that's my job here. Again, I need to... If there's a particularly instructive game, I owe it to everybody to really explain everything as best I can, because that's why we're doing the speedrun. And so Queen H5, right? Bishop. So I think that... Okay, I think my mistake, actually... I'm not actually sure where my mistake was, because I'm pretty sure this is the theoretical move. Now, a couple of things in this position. The move d5 is extremely tempting because it looks active, you're attacking the knight. But the problem is that he castles. And, okay, in a certain sense, we've bitten off more than we can chew because, well, you can't take the knight because you lose the queen. And that might not seem like a problem, right? Okay, big deal. I can just develop my bishop. But look at what happens. He plays e6, and white does not have the manpower necessary to just defend this pawn. I mean, you just lose the central pawn because of this incredibly nasty pin that black is exerting on the queen. And, you know, and you're just going to end up a pawn down for no compensation. That's what makes this line very dangerous and actually a good weapon for people in this rating range. Now, some other people were like, okay, I get it. I get why not d5, but why are you not cutting the effectiveness of this pin? Well, the problem here is very similar. Black castles, right? And what's going on here? Look at this pawn on d4 very carefully. How can black apply the most pressure to this pawn with his next move? And this is the reason why I didn't play like this. This very nasty little move that really puts this pawn under the microscope. And, well, look at that. I mean, look at how much pressure there is on all aspects of white's position here. And if you go d5 now, again, black doesn't need to move his knight from c6. And if white tries to unpin himself by moving the queen, well, again, you lose the pawn. So, you know, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And this is a very nasty position. So does this make sense to everybody? And I want this to make sense because it's important to understand how the mechanism of this opening. So that's why I played bishop e5, because preemptively, I'm trying to take this knight out of commission for two reasons. First of all, I'm discouraging him from castling. Why? Because he's going to have to deal with a ruined pawn structure where his king is, and nobody likes that. And the second thing is that literally, I mean, if I take his knight, then he's got one less piece attacking d4. But, somehow I mistimed the bishop takes c6 move. And probably what I should have done is just taken and developed my bishop and played this normally. But I tried to be fancy. I played queen e2. And the idea behind this move is to preemptively unpin myself. So I'm preemptively counteracting the effectiveness of him putting a rook on d8. That's no longer going to pin the queen that used to be on d1. And also I'm potentially angling for one of these squares to apply more pressure on the knight. But he goes bishop b4, pinning me the other way. And somehow, white just doesn't have, again, the resources necessary to defend against all of these crisscrossing pins. So, can you explain why the ruined pawns on the king side aren't a big deal? Yeah, exactly. So we should take the knight now. But I tried to delay this, and honestly, I missed knight e7. I forgot that he can get his knight into the game and simultaneously support his other knight, so that if we take, that the effectiveness of that is completely nullified because now one knight has replaced the other. And I mistimed bishop takes c6. Now, a couple of people are wondering, okay, I get it. Why am I not afraid of bishop takes f3? Why is this pawn structure not to be feared? And there is two things. First of all, I've often talked about how pawn structure is not the most important factor for evaluating the position. And let me make one very important clarification. I mentioned earlier that black's pawn structure being ruined near black's king is disastrous. Why is that the case? But why do we not care as much about the pawn structure on white's end? So I introduced an analogy. Imagine two houses. The houses are both in a very bad state of repair. Old, and they're collapsing. But in one house is abandoned, and the houses next door are also abandoned. And it's a matter of time before the house collapses, and eventually the house does collapse, and it causes damage to the surrounding streets and surrounding houses, and that's not good. But in the other house, there's like a huge family that lives there. And if the house collapses, it causes death, and it's a tightly packed community, and it impacts the houses next door, and the people there are impacted. So pawn structure is completely relative to what's going on that side of the board. Black's queen side pawn structure is like that house where people live. And because it's ruined, it's a lot easier to access Black's king. But if you look at White's pawn structure, White can just castle queenside. White can decide to live on the other side of the board. And the worst thing that's possibly going to happen in regards to this pawn structure is that, Black might win one pawn. Big frickin' whoop. He's going to win one pawn. Okay, that's not the end of the world. Sometimes it is, but not in this specific instance. Okay? What is the worst thing that could happen for Black? Checkmate. Black could get checkmated in like 2 moves. Okay? So when you were evaluating pawn structure, you have to understand 2 main things. Pawn structure tends to be a particularly important phenomenon under 2 conditions. First is that there is a king next to the pawn structure that has been impacted. Number 2 is that you're close to an endgame. In pawn endgames, pawn structure is crucial because it determines which side has the easier time creating a passed pawn, right? But in a normal middle game, like a pair of doubled pawns is just nothing to fret over in most cases. That doesn't mean it's not important. That doesn't mean it doesn't need to be factored in. But hopefully this makes some sense. And that's basically the reason why we're not afraid of bishop f3. Okay, even if we didn't get a chance to take on c6, I wouldn't really mind Black taking on f3. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, that was a little out there. But, what ended up happening is that we didn't get a chance to take his knight. And so he was able to sort of extend the pressure on this pawn without us being able to lessen it by taking the knight. It was the whole idea of bishop e5. And knight f5 was the first inaccuracy because he allowed us now to take the knight and ruin his pawn structure and bury his bishop, which is a lot more important, by the way, than his pawn structure being ruined. Again, it's not the pawn structure itself that's important here. It's the fact that it buries his bishop in the self-made prison. And what should he have done? How should he have exerted pressure on this pawn instead of knight f5? Well, e5 would be like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Maybe you're allowing de, but or d5, but rook a d8 and then maybe double rooks, right? It's not rocket science. And then at the right moment you take on f3, and you do that because you win the pawn. So it's as simple as that. Now the second mistake, if you're a 1600, listen up, because this is, in my opinion, I don't mean to sound condescending. I'm passionate about getting this out there because I think it could help people. I mean, at any level. And this is the concept of prematurely, okay, how should I say this without people interpreting this the wrong way? But like releasing the tension or prematurely trading pieces, you can call it a million different things, but it's this tendency to go for a clarified position or a forced line rather than keeping the tension on the board. Okay? And you see this all the time. Like, you have a trade that could be made to clarify the position, and people just do it. But every single trade has to be evaluated very, very carefully. And a trade like this one has the capacity to change the course of the game completely. It's not just, I take a bishop for a knight, whatever. Okay, this could completely derail the progress that Black has been making, and it does. Because what this move does is it absolves me of the need to defend the d4 pawn. Black's knight was basically the only piece that could exert serious pressure on my position. And in fact, the ironic thing is, what would be Black's correct move here? And I say ironic because it's actually not to take the bishop, but to do something useful with the knight. What could he have done? He could have redirected the pressure onto my knight. And if I allow knight takes f3, my position collapses. So knight g3 was what I planned to do. But White is hanging by a thread here. He can take this pawn. And I'm attacking his queen. So if he takes my knight, you get a mass liquidation. And I'm a pawn down here. But again, his bishop is buried. So that's what's important. But I realize now that he's got queen h3. And now he's really getting to my king. And guess what piece is at the middle of all of this? It's the knight. So for that reason, knight takes e3 was actually a very, very disastrous mistake, and he's still doing okay here. But without this bishop, his position is very, very, very difficult. And we won simple. Okay, so here we stop him from going e5 and exploiting the pin. By the way, the beautiful line. You guys ready for a jaw-dropping idea? If we go king h1, what I didn't like is that he can go e5 anyway. And you could look at this and say, wait, isn't that the entire reason that we went king h1 so that we could take the pawn? Well, yes, but watch this. Now he takes the knight. Now it turns out that we can take with a pawn, but the natural recapture would be rook takes f3. Could somebody find black's idea here? Okay, this is not like crazy, but it's kind of nice. Boom goes the dynamite. And guess what piece is behind it all? Bishop on b6, which has been activated. And rook h4 checkmate. That's, I think there's a name for this. It's like it's not the Arabian maid. It's not Anastasia's maid. It's some version of the two. And that's what I didn't want to allow. So that's why we simply put a piece on the e5 square, blockading that square entirely. And the rest was very simple. The rest was a matter of consolidating, defending our weaknesses, stopping the queen from infiltrating, and then eventually picking up the pieces that start to crumble because black cannot hold everything together because he's playing down a piece. Okay, so that's basically how we won. So the key moment in the game really was in the beginning, me not taking on c6 and delaying that for too long, allowing knight e7, and then him going knight f5, well, not a big mistake, but knight takes e3, and this was the big mistake. And it doesn't, you can look at this game quickly and you can gloss over this moment entirely because it looks like a completely innocuous trade, but positionally speaking, it's a disaster. Are you playing the best moves which you would actually play in a game? For the most part, yes. I'm actually playing full strength. I'm making some decisions to simplify the game, but not many. So basically, I'm playing my normal strength. And that's an ambitious, project. I'm trying to explain my moves, but I'm not really modifying my playstyle.